Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm M Seeker of Truth. I'm a truth seeker, content creator, researcher, and grift buster. I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. Are there any truth seekers in the building? Fantastic. Not alone then. So it's been a bit of a weird one over the last couple of years, hasn't it? And during that time, a lot of people have come out of the woodwork with some extraordinary stories. And I guess that's kind of what grift busting is about, and what got me into that is looking into some of these stories and looking into some of these extraordinary claims. Anyway, I'm here today not to talk about me. I'm here to actually interview a very interesting guy with a very interesting story. And his name's Gary McKinnon. So we welcome on stage Gary McKinnon. Rightio. In which case, let me tell you another story. Yeah, so another example of grift busting. There was a guy that was claiming himself to be the rightful King of England. And when I looked into it, he also claimed that he was Patrick Kennedy, JFK's son. That's quite convenient. When I looked into him, there was plenty wrong about his story. But the thing is he knew who I was and he knew what I did. So I had to go in disguise. So I created a new YouTube channel. I donned a wig. I donned some shades. I put on an American accent. And I got him to come on camera with me. And that was a very interesting interview, to say the least. And one of the things I caught him out on was he said that he was 40 years old. Well, Patrick Kennedy died a long time ago. And actually, he would be 47 today. So I said, how old are you? He said, 40. I said, but he would be 47. He said, yeah, that's right. I said, so how old are you? And he choked up. I said, I'm 40. I said, well, how does that work? It's just another example of some of the things that, I've come across some crazy characters in my time. Well, I've only been doing it for 2 years now. But another person, his name is Ted Marr. And he does a radio show, I think it's called Out of This World Radio in America. And he claimed to be able to channel beings and such. And when I was in an interview with him, he'd said about that he regularly goes aboard a Pleiadian mothership. And so I asked them about it. They said, I'd love to take you up there sometime. So I said, great, all right then I'll come aboard your alien mothership. And when it came down to it, he got me to do some chants. I could only describe what happened next as a led imagination exercise. He said, oh, do you feel it? We're coming on board now. Oh, here you go. Can you see him? It's Admiral Halosaurus, who's invited you aboard the spaceship. And then from there, it got wackier. He ended up taking me to the zoo that was on board. I met a talking elephant. And then he took me to some screening room where he says that you could go anywhere in the world. And he said, let's go to the beach in Hawaii. So I said, yeah, fine. And he took me there and said, oh, can you feel the warmth on your skin from the sun? And he said, I said, yeah, well, no. But yeah, okay, I'll play along. And he said, let's go for a swim. So yeah, I actually took my top off on the stream and started swimming. But yeah, some funny characters out there. And the problem is, these days, there's especially over the last couple of years, lots of people come out of the woodwork, and the waters of truth are murky enough as it is. So I think it's very important that, especially with some of these more extreme stories, that we check them, we research them, and we try and see, are these guys legit? Because if they're misleading people, if they're profiting off the either vulnerable or people just trying to find the truth, I think that's really bad. And I think if people can do that bit of extra research and listen and be open-minded, if you believe in someone and someone tells you, well, look into this because he lied about that, I think it's really worth looking into. So yeah, I mean, I've been interested in conspiracy theories and alternative truths for 18 years now. I started off by looking into sort of UFOs, the Roswell, 9/11, things like that. And I always wanted to carry on looking into, truth seeking and perhaps somehow spread, things that I'd found. And a YouTube channel was a good way of doing that. But I actually ended up doing the grift busting more than the truth seeking. And when I was doing videos on things like the Mandela effect and other things, people were commenting, well, who are you going to expose next? And I'm not out here, I'm not, doing these things to expose people. I'm just looking into it like a truth seeker, like anyone else. And if I find some red flags, I'm going to share them. But yes, it seems that people want me to do the grift busting part more often, but it's an interesting thing. You know, the truth seeking as well. There's so much out there that we've been lied to about. There's so much out there that's not quite right. We've been indoctrinated into, and I think truth seeking is extremely important. So, and saying that, Gary McKinnon, I first saw him about 17 years ago on Project Camelot with Kerry Cassidy. And he did an interview then, and his story basically is that he managed to gain access into NASA computer systems and military computer systems. And whilst he was there, he saw some interesting, to say the least, stuff. So I'm really excited to speak to him more. I'll let him tell you what he found. But the US tried to extradite him, and God knows what they'd have done if they would have managed that. But luckily, it got blocked. So I don't know. Is Gary ready? Can we bring Gary on? Gary McKinnon, are you there? Come and help me. I don't know. Has anyone got any questions about grift busting or anything to add, about truth seeking and the importance of that? What made you get into it in the first place? Well, I suppose it all started seeing lights in the sky. I don't know if many of you have seen some weird things in the sky. For me, it started off, I saw some lights making some unusual, when you see a plane, it kind of has its trajectory and, it's going one way. And satellites, you can tell what they, you can tell those, I know all the usual kind of apparent explanations for some of these lights in the sky. But when you see them do sort of triangular formations and disappear, and do them at speeds, you have to, wonder what it is. I mean, by definition, it's an unidentified flying object or flying light, isn't it? So I suppose that's what got me into it. And then later on, in broad daylight, I did see a cigar-shaped, classic cylindrical object going across the sky. I was working, I think I was only a teenager. I was working on a checkout in a shop. And the next customer was waiting for me to serve them, and I could see out these big glass pane windows, and I just stopped, and I think at one point there was kind of, hello, can I get served? But I was just totally froze and just watched this in broad daylight, and no one else seemed to see it. It was weird. It was like I was on my own seeing it, or it was only me that could see it, but no one was looking out the window and going, oh. But yeah, saw that going across the sky, and since then been absolutely fascinated about all those sort of things that there's no kind of explanation. And do governments we know that they know about these things, and they've investigated these things. So what do they know? And are they ours, or are they something extraterrestrial perhaps? So yeah, great question. Thank you very much. So yeah, let's bring on Gary McKinnon. Sorry, Gary.
Bright light.
In the bright lights. It's great to meet you. We did meet briefly beforehand.
Sorry, I'm a bit late. Got stuck at the bar.
You got stuck at the bar. Well, it's better than getting the wrong train like you did in another interview, I hear.
That's a very good point.
But you're here. You made it. Better late than never, eh?
Yeah.
I've already kind of briefly explained your story is you managed to. I didn't say hacking, because I don't know if you'd call it hacking, but you managed to gain access on to some NASA systems and some other military systems. Is that right?
Yeah, it was more password cracking. So the news would have you believe at the time, oh, computer genius, evil computer hacker. But it was more to do with their stupidity than my genius, because there was no genius. I wrote a script that scanned for blank passwords. If you work on computers, you have a password. It can be complex or not complex. These were military systems, government systems, and they were actually blank. There was no password. Some of them were actually password, and some of them were the name of the account. So it was crazy. So you're right, it wasn't hacking, it was password cracking, and very easy password cracking at that.
So what does that say, really? That says a lot, I suppose, about the security of these systems. Very poor. Made a big mistake there.
Yeah, very poor. No firewalls, as you would normally have. And also, I basically did a very old method known as trust relationship exploitation. So I would hack into a contractor that worked for the military or the government, and they were already trusted by the network, and from then you can step in. So, yeah.
You found some interesting things whilst you were looking around on there. What sort of method did you use to find these things, and what did you find?
I'd read Stephen Greer, the famous UFO guy.
Yep.
Yeah. I'd read his book from the Disclosure Project. And one of the witnesses, Donna Hare, she was a NASA photographic mission launch slide expert. And she had secret level clearance because all the hardware in NASA is very secret. And she did technical photography so they could analyze the launch, see what went wrong, what went right, etc. And she worked in Johnson Space Center, specifically in Building 8. And I'd already hacked Johnson Space Center. And she said, just across the corridor, she had a colleague. And these are meant to be compartmented. They're not really meant to communicate. But she said her friend across the corridor one day invited her in to his room, his lab, and said to her, Donna, you're a photographic expert. Come and look at this photograph and see what you think. And he showed her this high-resolution satellite image of, I think it was a forest. And there was a huge white disc floating above the trees. And being a photographic expert, and it being the days of analog photography, not digital, she said, well, is it a blob in the emulsion? You know, her brain's looking for conventional explanations at first. And he then pointed to the shadow and said, well, blobs in the emulsion don't have circular shadows beneath them. And to cut a long story short, this was an airbrushing lab in Johnson Space Center, whose only sole function was to airbrush out images of UFOs from high-resolution satellite photography because they're so preponderant in the atmosphere. And that was her. She was one of the witnesses, one of 400 witnesses, I think. And I thought, well, I'm already in JSC, Johnson Space Center. I'll have a look. And when you've got admin access to the network, as I did have, you can run commands. NASA are very good at auditing because they're a government. Well, they're actually military, but they're supposedly a government department. And you can use, they're all on Windows, running normal Windows. And you have these comment fields, so you know which room the computer's in, what its serial number is, all basic auditing. So I ran a command to find out which PCs were in Building 8, because it lists the building, the floor, etc. And there were only a few, like probably less than a dozen. And I got all the machines that were in Building 8. They all had weak or blank passwords. And the first one I looked at had 2 folders, like raw and filtered, or processed and unprocessed. I can't quite remember the folder names. But these images were huge. This was in the days of dial-up modems, 56K. It would take like 15 minutes to download an MP3, a song, you know.
Yeah, I remember those days. Yeah,
yeah.
To take a while to actually get an image on the screen. Then.
Oh yeah.
Was it?
Yeah, like line by line. Yeah. And so I was going to transfer it. I thought this looks just like what Donna Hare said. She's absolutely bang on. But 230, 250 megabytes plus, and it was 5 minutes per megabyte in those days. So
wow,
a long time. Yeah. So I just double-clicked on the first one, and that launched the... also, it was proprietary NASA software to view the images. I probably couldn't have viewed them at home because it's their own specialist software. So I double-clicked the first image on the list, and it started coming down, you know. And I was using something like PC Anywhere. This was called Remotely Anywhere. You can see the desktop remotely. You can move the mouse around just like you're sitting at the machine. And it slowly started coming down. At first, it was just blackness. And then you started to see a hemisphere of a planet. I assume it was Earth, because the satellite airbrushing lab was for Earth satellites. And then suddenly appeared this classic cigar shape, like you were discussing earlier. No seams, no rivets, very smooth, no exhaust pipes, no rockets. But it did have these sort of geodesic domes on top and below and at either end, either side. Like the golf ball domes, you see the radars at Menworth Hill.
Right.
Yeah. And that got 2/3 of the way down the screen. And then I'd got my time zones confused. I was smoking a bit of weed at the time and got my time zones confused. And I saw the mouse move. So someone else was actually at the PC. And he went down, or she went down to the local area network icon on the bottom right-clicked, chose disconnect, and boom, that was me. But I did get to see 2/3 of the picture. That was my eureka moment, but also at the same time, I got caught. So,
Wow. I mean, how were you feeling at that moment? Because it must have been, at one time to confirm kind of what you were out there looking for, and then literally before the picture is even fully loaded, you have this moment of, oh, I've been caught, I guess. How did you feel?
yeah, it was like, coitus interruptus, really. It was because a lot of the hacking is very boring. It's not exciting like you see in films. You write your scripts, you run the scans, you wait for hours, you get the results, you trawl through the results. But I also wrote scripts to trawl through the results. So it's, a good sysadmin automates everything. You're lazy. The best sysadmins are lazy sysadmins. But yeah, it was a really good feeling, and then the oh shit moment at the same time. And then I'm just thinking, oh no, when will it come? When will the tap on the shoulder come?
And it did, didn't it? You got visited by what, cyber crime unit? Is that right?
Yep, the National High Tech Crime Unit.
Wow. How much longer after that happened were you visited?
That's a good question. I think it was late 2001 when I found the UFO picture, and I was arrested in March 2002. So it might have been 3-4 months at tops. But it turned out the NHTCU, National High Tech Crime Unit, were actually, because the Americans had told them, oh, it's from this British Telecom and BT internet address at this time. So they contacted BT. They said, oh, it's, but at the time I was living with my girlfriend at her auntie's house, and it was in my girlfriend's name. She obviously left me after all this. And so they didn't know who they were looking for. There was like me, my girlfriend, her auntie, her auntie's son and daughter. So they put up physical surveillance, apparently. But I never left the house. I still was, sitting there on the PC. So they didn't have a clue who they were looking for. So unfortunately, they actually arrested everyone and searched the whole house. And yeah.
Wow. It must have been quite disruptive to the people you were living with, your girlfriend and whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And that was the worst effect of all this, the knock-on effect to your friends, your family, your loved ones.
Sure. So when they visited you, what did they kick the door in, or did they politely knock at the door and ask, who lives here? Can I see your computer devices?
Unfortunately, my girlfriend at the time answered the door. I was still asleep because I think I'd been up all night. I think I'd stopped the hacking by then, but I'd been up all night doing something on the computer. I think it might have been Galactic Civilizations 3, the space strategy game.
Brilliant.
So, yeah. And, so I woke up very, very sleepy. I'd only had a few hours sleep. And it was Jeff Donson from the National High Tech Crime Unit shaking my shoulder. You've been arrested under the Computer Misuse Act, 1996, whatever, and took me into the kitchen, separated us both. And I put my dressing gown on, and I totally forgot I had an ounce of hash in my dressing gown pocket as well. And they're doing a pat down, but they missed that, thank God. But so that wasn't on the charge sheet.
Wow. They weren't looking for that then. They were just looking for
hacky stuff.
So, I mean, it's quite a traumatic thing to happen to you. You were woken up by them, right?
Yeah.
For someone, I mean, because you weren't a professional computer. I mean, you knew a lot about computers, but you weren't doing it professionally. You weren't a hacker professionally, or
no, I was an IT professional, but not hacking.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So, quite an interesting thing to happen. Now, is this? I mean, was there no kind of masking IP addresses back then? Or?
At first, I did, and I also used to jump through hoops. I set up a proxy chain so I could get on one machine, I'd start off on like a library. I use a library or universities, stuff like that. And then from then to the contractors, and from the contractors to the actual networks. And sometimes from a library or a university directly to the military sites, because no firewalls, no passwords, no basic protection. Yeah.
You said about you had interest in sort of the UFO phenomenon. Was that the only, what spurred you on to go delving in and trying to access all these systems?
Well, yeah, I'd had an interest since a small child, mainly due to my stepfather, who was very into sci-fi and UFOs, and introduced me to that kind of side of life. So we can all blame him now. The main thing for me was the technology. I thought if this technology really does exist, it should be used for the good of all of us. Free energy, or at least very cheap, incredible propulsion power, possibly anti-gravity. If this is being kept secret, why? Because obviously that would be used against people if it's being kept secret, rather than furthering humanity. And at the time, there were. It was a bit of an energy crisis at the time, as there is every few years, even worse now than it's ever been, cost of living, etc. But at the time, there was a very popular phrase bandied about called heating or eating. Old age pensioners had to choose whether to pay for their heating or pay to have food and then sit on their chair with a blanket and eat their food. So it was a bit of, I've been told, because of the Asperger's, it was a bit of a crazy crusade, a bit obsessive and all that sort of stuff. But to me, it's just right thinking.
That's right. So, I mean, you've been told that you're ASD, you're on the spectrum. Is that right?
Yeah.
High functioning.
Yeah. Apparently, yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, because of the high profile of the case, I had 5 leading psychologists, psychiatrists, whatever the right term is, analyze and run tests on me. And I said to one of the guys, "Isn't it just a personality type? Because it's not classed as a mental illness per se. It's more of a syndrome, whatever that means." And he said, "Yeah, I do think it's a personality type, but don't quote me on that because I've written 3 books on the topic. So I can't say it's just a personality type. It has to be, an accessible thing, an issue, a problem."
So we talked about the image of the cigar-shaped object, cylindrical object that you saw, but you also saw some other interesting things on some other systems. One of the things was a list of non-terrestrial officers.
Yep, that's right. Non-terrestrial officers was a spreadsheet. I can't remember if that. Oh no, that was the heading. That was the actual heading in the Excel spreadsheet. Possibly the file name as well on the actual hard drive. And it was a list of ship names. And these weren't like US Navy ships, because I did Google them at the time. Well, it wasn't Google. I think it was Deja Vu or something, the search engine.
Ask Jeeves.
No, Ask Jeeves was a bit too commercial at that time, but yeah. And personnel, ranks and names, and also ship to ship and fleet to fleet transfers of material spelt the military way, with an E at the end, not an A, material. And lots of exotic chemical names, molybdenum, I can't even say that. Lots of really exotic chemical names. And that led me to believe it didn't mean non-terrestrial as in, little green men or aliens. It was a space-going force, maybe even just a low Earth orbit thing or something, but...
Yeah, so it could suggest non-terrestrial means off planet, right? So, these officers apparently off planet. Who knows what that means? That they are orbiting the planet in some sort of craft or secret space program, or whether they're out there and somewhere in the solar system or beyond. Right? It could be either. Yeah.
But I mean, most people have taken it to mean a secret space fleet, which is a logical assumption. We have, the CIA has secret satellites. The Defense Intelligence Agency has secret satellites. NASA launches military satellites. Elon Musk launches military satellites. So there is already a secret space force in that manner. But there was no hard evidence of a military space-going force at that time. Although now they have recently formed the US Space Force, whatever it's called. I don't pay a lot of attention to that stuff these days. But yeah, so it could have been, the early burgeonings of a secret space force.
Do you think the formation quite recently of a US Space Force is the beginnings of disclosure to perhaps non-terrestrial officers, perhaps?
I don't think disclosure will ever come from officialdom at all. I think it comes from people.
Probably a great point, and I think, as I was talking earlier about truth seekers, I think that there really is a lot to say about people going out their way to, as you did, to find these nuggets of truth and to force out disclosure the best we can. But even then, do these things get covered up and twisted and manipulated so that you still don't know what the truth is? Interesting point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a different arena, but, Julian Assange is a great example of that. If you're talking about whistleblowers and then their persecution once they're caught. Not that he was caught, because he was a journalist. He wasn't doing anything wrong, but...
So going back to the fleets of ships, right? So there was names of different ships. How many do you reckon there were?
I was on a 1024 by 768 monitor at the time. So this spreadsheet pretty much filled the screen. So it would have been about 24 rows in the default Excel row size format. So maybe 20, 30 names.
So that's a lot of potential ships, even if they are float on the water, conventional ships, as we say, to have them, all these names of ships which are not public. That's even a lot of boats, ships, even if it's in the conventional manner, if they're hidden.
Yeah, totally. And the personnel as well. I think that they went on for a bit longer, maybe 1.5 pages. And I think it was a Navy website I found this on, not a website, it was a private military networks. But quite small, which you might expect. If it is a secret space force, it's probably not going to be huge, because it is early, it is, the birth of it, perhaps, as far as I know. So yeah, 20-odd ships, maybe 40-odd personnel names, and then the strange material, chemical transfers. So
yeah,
and all in one spreadsheet.
Wow. So a lot of people could assume, which I assume, that so were these two documents linked or close by each other, like the non-terrestrial officers and the ships. So was these documents connected?
One Excel spreadsheet and various tabs.
So you've got a part of the document saying non-terrestrial officers and then these ships. So you could assume that they might potentially be off-world ships.
Oh yeah, totally, and all linked. So you've got the ships, the personnel, and material transfers.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so these ship names, they all start like USS.
That's one of the things I don't remember. They were ship names, but whether it was USS or...
I think I did see screenshots, but the actual name bit's been blurred out. I don't know if they're real or whether they are recreations.
They're not real, because my hard drive went straight to ONI, Office of Naval Intelligence in Washington. So that's never been publicised.
Yeah, because I saw on them they said USS, and then it was blurred out the rest of it for each of the names. Which that's why I asked about the names.
There's been a lot of this. What's the famous secret space fleet thing that people quote? Gary McKinnon discovered. I should know its name because I've negated it so many times. There's basically a rumor going around that it's I should know this name. I've read it so many times. Thinking I can't bloody remember. But there's a famous secret space fleet theory that originated on ATS, Above Top Secret Forum. And I spent so much time on YouTube and the web saying, no, I did not discover that. I never saw that name. It's all made up. Complete fail here from name remembrance. But
I'm not sure what you're talking about, so I can't help you. But so with all this happening, so what happened after the crime unit, the cyber crime unit, or whatever you said they were, they'd come. You had a lengthy legal battle, I guess, afterwards.
Yeah, I had a couple of interviews with the NHTCU, and then they went over to, and at first they presented it as, oh, you'll just do 6 months in jail tops under the Computer Misuse Act 95 and 96. Or maybe even just community service, a few weeks community service. But then they went to Washington and they visited the top brass in the Navy. And the Navy, by the way, interestingly, were the ones that seemed to handle most of this, in my case. And there was no FBI involvement, even though it was international. And when NHTCU came back from Washington, they got really heavy. They were obviously very impressed by top brass in Washington. And then November of 2002, having been arrested in March, extradition threats came through. Well, extradition promise. Yeah. So it went from a few months in prison or possibly a few weeks cleaning the streets to 8 to 20 years picking up that soap, boy.
Wow. So after a trip to the US, they were either impressed or spooked into going hard on, what this means. Suddenly it became a big thing with perhaps huge punishments.
Yeah.
What do you think would have happened? Obviously, you didn't get extradited in the end. So what do you think would have happened if they would have managed to extradite you?
They really wanted a poster boy for security. Like, you try and hack us, this is what happens, which is kind of crazy, really. I mean, they called me the biggest military computer hacker ever, but there's been viruses that have gotten to more computers than I have. So it's all just marketing.
So their problem is more about what you potentially could have seen rather than any sort of actual damages or anything.
Yeah, or not even that, because the government isn't privy to all this UFO stuff. It's need to know basis. It's more about the embarrassment, I think. My friend Matthew Bevan, Data Stream Cowboy, he went through a similar process in the 90s, and they called him the biggest threat to national security since Hitler. So, yeah. So they're really overplaying. Yeah, they always overplay and overstate the threat level. It's par for the course.
So do you think it's possible, if they would have managed to get you over there and extradite you, do you think there's a possibility that they could have tried to hire you?
No.
Not even, to do some lower level, or even to have contract with you for you not to do these sort of talks?
No, because I'm actually, my arrest warrant is still live. I'm still on the Interpol red list by solicitor checks every now and then. So they couldn't be seen to be fraternizing with the enemy, so to speak. Yeah.
Haven't the US government done that before and hired people that were perhaps...
Not while the arrest warrant's still live. No.
Oh, yeah. Just post-war...
Operation Paperclip.
Yeah. Burner on bread.
Nazis are fine.
Yeah.
Scottish system administrators aren't.
They tried to extradite you. When did they start saying about extradition? That was around 2004?
November 2002.
2002.
But what they did then, they waited 3 years. And my God, what a 3 years that was for us, my family and I. And what they actually did was they changed, because we had an old extradition treaty with America from 1809, I think. And they changed the extradition treaty to account for all this computer law, and specifically my case was the major influence. And we got one of the draft copies, the first draft copies of the new treaty. It was written in American English.
Right.
Even though it was a UK-US treaty. And lots of the phrases were specifically from my charge sheet.
I see.
So I do apologise to everyone else that got prosecuted under that treaty after me, because it's mainly my fault.
You really think your case had a massive influence on that, and perhaps maybe even the trigger and the reason they did that.
Yeah.
And am I to understand, when they did that, they had the power to extradite British citizens, but we didn't have the power to extradite US citizens in the same sort of matters?
Yeah, very good point. US citizens are protected by their constitution. And the other way around, it's just ridiculous. They need no evidence. All they have to do is charge you and say, that's your name, that's your address, these are the charges, you're coming over here. We can't do that with them at all. So it's hugely imbalanced. And it still is, because the only thing we got introduced as a result of my case is something called the forum bar, where in special circumstances, you can get extended appeals and look in detail at the circumstances of your case. But yeah, Americans are still protected by the Constitution, like the lady who, ran over that guy and killed him on his motorbike outside of the base.
Yeah.
Yeah, impossible to extradite.
They obviously didn't end up extraditing you. What happened there? How did it end up getting blocked? What was the circumstances around that?
Basically, medical evidence was what set me free. They said, look, this guy's clearly obsessive, beyond his own good, just kept on going. Even in interviews, I was still banging on about US foreign policy and UFO truth and blah, blah, blah. And we had one woman who'd been diagnosed with Asperger's for years contact the family and say, he's clearly got Asperger's, just look at him. And then I got assessed, and then they all said, yes, you have, you're high functioning, but you're on the spectrum. And then we had some government doctors assess as well. And there was a bit of toing and froing because every side has their expert witnesses, don't they? And we really had a mistrust of this one particular psychologist, who I won't mention the name of because he's a bit litigious.
Right.
And so we stood our ground for a while. And then eventually Theresa May, who was Home Sec at the time, disallowed the extradition. She barred it. So, yeah.
So before they changed the extradition laws, did the US have to? I believe they had to show that there was physical damages. Is that right, or something along those lines to get you?
Yeah, there is a burden of proof legally.
Yeah.
But the CPS, our own Crown Prosecution Service, our version of the DOJ over there, asked them to show their side of the evidence, and there was nothing. And the CPS themselves said, "This is just hearsay. There's no computer logs. Because there was no damage. Obviously." The fact that I'd entered the systems and they had to shut them down and analyze them and delete my software or whatever, you could vaguely class that as damage because it's downtime. But I wasn't switching off machines because I was going through multiple machines, I needed them all to be on to maintain my connection. So
you didn't actually cause, didn't break these computers or anything like that. But they did. Am I right in thinking that they tried to claim that you'd done £4,000 worth of damage to each of the machines?
Yeah. It turns out for it to be an extraditable computer offence, it had to be worth at least 1 year in prison. And to be worth at least 1 year in prison, you had to have done at least $5,000 worth of damage. So lo and behold, every machine I was on, I'd done exactly $5,000 worth of damage to. So a fit up, to use an American term.
Yeah, interesting. So, so I'm guessing they see that when you said that the crime unit came to you, the cyber crime unit came to your house, they seized your devices, right?
Yeah,
and I guess that was all of the devices in the household.
Yeah, and these were the days before tablets and stuff, and mobile phones were new. But I did have 3 of my computers. Plus 6 computers that I was fixing for friends.
Wow!
So my friends were pissed off as well. They took all those PCs. But yeah.
Did your friends get the devices back? Did you get yours back?
Yeah, it took not too long for my friends. I think 2 or 3 months. But one of mine I didn't get back for like 2 years. And the British police, their funny sense of humour. They sent back my main hard drive on the main machine I used for the hacking. But they sent it back. It was a forensic copy of my original hard drive, not my actual hard drive. And it was in the format that only the proprietary police forensic software can read.
Oh, wow.
But luckily for me, I've got a friend who's got a copy of that software. So he translated it for me. And it was
that's handy to have those sort of friends.
It was quite handy back then,
yeah. So I'm guessing that you weren't allowed to access the internet for a while?
Yep, 2000. When was my internet ban? 2000. Thanks, Lou. 2005 till 2012. Yeah.
Wow, 7 years then. Not been able. Was that not allowed to use computers, or not allowed to go online?
Funnily enough, yeah, it was not allowed to be online, not allowed to use computers.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this all kind of ended. When did you say 2012? 12, and. Since then, what have you been doing? What's your interests? What have you been looking into? Or
First thing I did was cried like a baby when we got the news that we'd won. Years of stress and relief coming out, and then just a couple of years sitting on my arse, just feeling happy that I wasn't in jail really. And then so 2014, I started my own company, small SEO, doing search optimization for small businesses, getting your products or services to page 1 of Google. And that's been growing and doing fine since then, 2014. I'm not so interested in UFOs and stuff anymore. I mean, it's still an interesting topic. But I have we just bought our first house, and I've got my first shed. I'm a real man now. And I'm going to start on anti-gravity experiments after the Biofield Brown style of things. It turns out if you have a capacitor charged to extremely high voltage, like 60,000 volts, 250,000 volts, it exhibits a net thrust in one direction or loses mass. And lots of people will tell you it's just air molecules and the wind is providing the lift. But there's lots of other experiments. Honda did one in '95, and the thing lost 3% mass in a bath of oil. So it isn't air movement because there's no air in the bath of oil. So so running a small company and doing anti-gravity experiments. Like they start next week.
Wow, that is interesting. Look forward to seeing what you come up with in your shed.
Cool.
I want to give the audience a chance to ask some questions. So
yeah,
it's a weird one, but based on your sort of discoveries, I've got a friend who started to look into what shape the Earth is. Do you have any inklings or ideas or an opinion about that?
Yeah, I mean, as far as my perception goes, it's a globe because the moon's a globe, Jupiter's a globe, But it's funny you asked that because yesterday I was chatting with a guy for 3 hours who doesn't call himself a flat earther. He calls himself a globe skeptic, which is kind of middle of the road. And I said to him, ultimately, it's all very interesting, but ultimately I don't care because it's not important in my life right now. But it is interesting. There's lots of experiments with lasers. You have to know a lot about optics to really dive into this. It's interesting, but I don't really have an opinion. It's like the moon landings. I used to think they were faked. Then I did a lot of research and found out that most of the conspiracy elements of the theory against the landings can be easily debunked. Flat Earth, not in my life, really. But interesting. It's interesting to discuss, and it's very educational because you have to really look into details to even have that discussion, especially with optics, lasers, gravity, etc. So interesting discussion, but will it ever end? Okay.
Right question.
What do you think about the dark side of the moon?
Dark Side of the Moon, brilliant album. Interesting because there is, I think, Clementine mission photographed Dark Side of the Moon, and I think the Japanese did do or plan to do a mission photographing the dark side. But the moon's very interesting. I mean, lots of the craters are actually polygonal. They're straight-sided hexagons, I think, or pentagons, ironically. I can't remember. And also, if you look at these impacts that are apparently from space rocks, they're all straight down. None of them have a trail. None of them are oval. They're all like circular impacts, straight down, 90-degree impacts. So that's interesting. The craters themselves are interesting. No scientist in the world has an explanation, geological or otherwise, for the fact that many of the craters are straight-sided. So that's weird. And there are structures on the moon, I'm convinced. My friend John Leonard Wilson, not his real name, he's on YouTube. He's got a crazy telescope, and he's found some really interesting things. If you look him up on YouTube, John Leonard Wilson, and watch all his videos, there are some things that are far too rectilinear and structured on the moon to be natural geological formations. So, the moon's interesting. Okay. Chris.
Yes.
How you doing, pal? Nice one.
Yes, I can't wait to have you on my podcast.
Yes.
We've been looking forward to this for a long time.
Cool, man.
Mate, you posted a photo the other day, I think it was on Twitter, you and your mate, and you look pretty stoned.
Oh, we were high as fuck.
And it just brought back so many memories of like either you were there or you weren't there, you know?
Yeah. Oh, by the way, I've been permanently banned from Twitter now. Whee, badge of honour.
I block you anyway, mate. No, mate, Gaz, I really appreciated our friendship, mate.
Oh, me too, Chris.
It's been very special for me, and yes, freedom.
Whee. Well, we'll have a pint in a bit.
Any other questions out there? I've got one.
Okay.
What do you think about? I heard you speak a little bit about this on another interview. Have we ever been to the moon? What do you think?
Yeah, I used to think, God, this is unlikely for so many reasons. There was a big race with the Russians, and it would have been a great propaganda coup to say we did it. And also, if you look at the tools that we use, apparently using sextants to get to the moon. Astronauts in a spaceship using a sextant to get to the moon. What the fuck? And also the rocket program itself, even when von Braun, the paperclip Nazi guy, although he said he was never a Nazi, he just had to say he was just to get his job. So many failures in the standard conventional rocket program. And then suddenly the Apollo missions, really high level of success, which is kind of weird because it's so much easier to launch a rocket than to get it to the moon, land your lunar module, which looked like it was made of papers, matchsticks and baker foil. But I did check out a lot of the main conspiracy elements, and they are debunkable. Like the battery being able to last in full sunlight, stuff like that. But again, a bit like the flat Earth thing. Ultimately, now I don't really care if we went to the moon or not, because it's not. I mean, it would be incredible to be revealed as a big lie, because then it would make people question a lot of other stuff. As is wont to happen with conspiracies. It's like the domino effect, isn't it? Well, if they lied about that, then... but ultimately, I'm more concerned with consciousness now and the betterment of us as a species rather than all the shiny stuff.
Yeah, and we can't really sort of, investigate much now because we don't have the technology anymore. Right?
Yeah, apparently we lost the way to get to the moon.
Yeah. We lost it.
Including 14,000 telemetry tapes or whatever it was that recorded everything.
That's right. They conveniently disappeared, right? So they only have the footage that was broadcast to the TV and a certain set of images.
Yeah.
But you'd think they'd have backups. They'd have, that's all disappeared conveniently as well. So...
Yeah.
Yeah, very interested. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on that.
My pleasure.
Just go back to the audience. Are there any other questions before we wrap up? Go for it.
What do you think about Elon Musk? Why do you send so many satellites?
What do you think about Elon Musk? Why do they send so many satellites up there?
I mean, he's obviously a huge character, and they're always to be suspected, I think, when you're that global and you have that kind of power. But he does launch military satellites. That's a known fact. So, I don't know, are his morals questionable? Does he just support defense in his country? Although I know he's South African in origin. And also, I think when you reach that level, you do get pressure that you probably can't speak about that you're having. So you have to start to do things that you may not want to do, just like, what's the name, the guys that own Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg. Yeah, if you get that big, you're under pressure and maybe even controlled to some extent. So it behoves all of us to keep a watch on these people, I think, keep an eye on them. Okay.
Gary, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, listen to your story. Thank you for sharing that with us all.
Cheers, Mike.
Yeah, and thank you guys for listening to my ramblings on at the beginning. Brilliant to meet you, and thank you very much, Gary McKinnon, everyone.
Cheers, thank you. Notice I called you Mike to keep it a secret.
I'll go by M.
Where'd you want your mic, Mike?